to the Building the DevFest.MN website. Woo! Woo!
Yeah, those are not.
What?
All right, let's do it.
This one's half done by someone else that I don't know. Try that one.
Yeah, right.
So how many people here have used or seen the DevFest.MN website? Awesome, you are our target audience. This is going to be, clicker works, oops, it's a warning. This is not your typical talk. So Lloyd and I are both organizers of the Google Developer Group Twin Cities, and he's our fearless leader, and we both decided that he's far too important to do any preparation for this talk. So what we're actually going to be doing is a bit of something that we learned out at Google. So we went through this Google training, and there's something called speechless, where the idea is a speaker should be ready at any time to be given a slide and to talk to it, and really get around to their message and come up with the ideas that they want to share. So this presenter has no idea what's coming next. So I'm at several points in the talk. I'm going to hand it over to Lloyd, and we're going to hear what he has to say about the DevFest website, which he was involved in building. Just a little tip for you, Lloyd. This little icon, you're going to see it in the bottom left-hand corner anytime I'm about to throw to you. So that's your hands, okay?
Including this slide?
No.
All right.
Not including the slide. This is the worst clicker ever, I think. So I might just end up pressing the button. All right, so my name is Fluin. I lead developer advocacy for a company called Trello, which is an online collaboration tool that tries to give you perspective on projects.
Oh, you're clicking your clicker anyhow.
See, you're cheating now.
Well, set the clicker down.
All right. I am also a Google developer expert in web technologies, so Google has certified and said, hey, this guy knows a little bit about building things with web technologies, and they've given me that certification.
Oh, I missed the cue. All right, so I'm Lloyd Cledwyn, and I work for McAllister College. This is good. I normally do this in different orders. So I like to pretend I'm a moose. I work for I volunteer, I do a lot of volunteering for one of the largest for-profit organizations in the world, and I work on the for-profit side of a small nonprofit over in St. Paul. I manage the IT of fundraising and development for McAllister College. I've also for years taught adjunct at the University of St. Thomas in their graduate programs in software. So those are kind of a few facets of what I end up doing.
So one disclaimer that we want to put out there is we did not build the DevFestMN site from scratch. There was a gentleman called Kyle Paul, who's one of the Google Developer Group organizers for Kansas City, and we took his code base as a start. So this would definitely not have been possible without his work. He gave us kind of a fully working site. You can actually, the link is here to his GitHub, and then you can see that site. And also if you look at the Kansas City DevFest, if you just Google that, that is the kind of existing base that we started with, although I think he's stolen some of our improvements. So in terms of when it comes to technology, in terms of what we were using to build the site, it was really based on AngularJS. So all of the kind of routing is being done. It's a single page application where we're loading JavaScript files in order to handle state, in order to handle variables, controllers, things like that. We use Firebase as our database backend. And then there's a set of build tools built on Grunt, which do things like minification, concatenation, downloading Bower components and swapping them out for CDNs, things like that. This site was great, but
So, and Stephen would show up from our planning meetings and we'll try and look through the plans that already existed, which were not as well laid out and not perfectly formulated. Kyle, as well as both of us, we're volunteers. We do this. We manage our GDGs kind of in our spare time, kind of out of passion, and bring our skill set that we have. And a lot of these projects that we do are not perfectly mapped out and perfectly planned as well as they need to be before you actually start building them. Usually they're just to get something done and shipping. That said, Kyle, brought his expertise in a nice way to this site that had a lot of kind of his working style baked into it, and I'm sure it worked really well for him.
So one of the things we did is as we started kind of taking what he had built and trying to make it our own, we started with the data model. So if you compare this to last year, where we didn't start with the data model, last year we actually ended up with 4 different APIs for schedule data. One was a CSV format. I think we had it in Firebase at some point. We had another JSON, and then we had a hard-coded XML version in the Android app, which was, we said, we're not doing that ever again. We're going to start with the API. We're going to say, what sort of content are we going to keep? And so with Firebase, there's this idea that denormalization is normal. So how do you chunk things up into the smallest bits and then kind of give up some of that normalization or that centralized integrity in order to have high performance and a great application. So as we thought about the DevFest data model, you actually see this in the source code on Firebase. There's kind of an admin section for controlling who can see what. We decided there's going to be a schedule endpoint where we're going to put session data. There's going to be a speakers endpoint where we're going to put speaker data. And then one of the things that we did from Kyle's version is we actually took and we put this individual conference as a subnode. So if you guys have ever used Firebase, it's actually really easy to say, hey, instead of storing that thing over here, I'm going to move the reference over here. And kind of everything just keeps on working because of the denormalization of references. So that was one of the first changes we made. We also, because as I said, that's to support multiple years and multiple conferences. It gave us an isolated endpoint to separate content from configuration, because there's actually a lot of the configuration of the site is stored in Firebase as well. And then one of the goals for the content, so if you look in the source code, images are actually stored in the database. So if you are an administrator on the DevFest.MN website and you drag and drop an image, that variable gets loaded in base64, and then that gets stored into Firebase right away. With the idea being that storing files can be hard, right? You can use S3, you can use Google File Storage, but those take more work. They take more setup, and if you can just store it in the same place where you're storing your session names and things like that, things are much easier. But there were some problems.
So this is a base 64. This is what an image looks like. You could cut and paste this into your HTML inside an image tag, and this would render out as a Stephen pretending he's a moose. And that's just fine, but it's a big chunk of text and data. And with the original structure that Kyle had, I think, one of the things you do when you're solving a problem just for the problem that you know and not thinking about all the problems that might yet exist, their DevFest it traditionally has been 1 or 2 tracks, and about the day with about 8 speakers maybe 10. Our DevFest is a little bit different. This year we have 6 simultaneous tracks. We have 35 speakers. At one point we had 38. And you upload the image. It doesn't do any resizing. So if you upload a 2 meg image, that's a chunk of data that's sitting there in the tree, the structure, the data tree in the Firebase NoSQL document store. And the way that Angular and Firebase work is, they'll just pull the data down. You ask for a reference to the starting point, and what it does, it behaves very, as it should. It gets all of the data from there. So the first time for us to load the speakers page, once we actually started to have a fair amount of data in there, it was really laggy. It just took a long time because it had to load down. It was about 8 megs, I think.
At the end, after we loaded all the speakers with their images, it was, I think, 13 meg of JSON, which is a little bit too much for kind of an endpoint. And the other thing about Firebase is because it's a data store, any sort of image processing would have to be, because all of it's being run client-side, any sort of image processing would have to be done after you download it, which is not really helpful, right? If I have to download 13 meg of data, then rendering a thumbnail out isn't going to save me any time. It's not going to save me any bandwidth. So there were a few issues there. And then we got into a conversation with our mobile team. So Patrick was very generous to offer to help build the mobile application and lead that effort. And for him, he ran into the same problem. Trying to download a 13 meg image and then parse it out using Java, using a completely different language that is not as great at working with base64 images, was tough. So actually what we ended up doing is we ended up building an entire proxy just to allow us to continue to store and upload the data into Firebase in the first place, but then to optimize the rendering out in a way that we could cache it, that we could create thumbnails, and then we could also put things like headers on those images. So even though the original source of the data we left in Firebase, that proxy allowed us to say, hey, every time you load the page, I'm not changing this, right? So if you visited the DevFest.MN website, every image of a speaker, for example, is going to be cached for about 10 hours. So regardless of what we do on the back end, you're going to keep getting that same image for 10 hours, which means you don't have to reload it, which means that we have these kind of massive, beautiful, high-res pictures of everybody, and you don't have to reload them. And then the other thing we were able to do is enable thumbnailing. So even though we have 13 megabit images totally, you only need like a 650 by 400 version of each of the speakers, unless you're pulling up the full speaker bio. One of the things that we felt, so originally the version that we cloned, it was hosted in GitHub Pages, but we felt that that was a little passé.
And we, over the last year, been really kind of embracing Firebase as a great hosting solution, kind of even the full stack solution. So one of the features that Firebase offers is not just data store and real-time data store and a level of security and authentication, which you all are using when you log in to the website. It's using Firebase authentication, but it also allows hosting. So we moved the file hosting off of, actually I don't think it was DeLorean that was hosted on GitHub. It was the previous, there was a previous DevFest site that was, is it Jekyll? Using the GitHub hosting in a box tool, which has its own standards that you have to follow, and it's a little bit frustrating. And so this version, if you were to clone Kyle Paul's GitHub to use for your own application, is meant to be hosted on any kind of general cloud hosting platform. His instructions tell you how to do it in Google Cloud hosting, and it's fine, but it adds another layer of complexity, and we're pretty excited to just step away from that and let Firebase even do the hosting.
The other thing that kind of annoyed us about the existing site that we got was repeats. So because of the way that they organized their session data, you actually had to have something in every slot, right? So if you had a registration keynote that took up, that everyone was expected to attend, they ended up putting that in every slot. And that's a little bit better when you have 3 tracks, but when we had 6 tracks, it just didn't feel very clean in order to put that same item into each of those tracks. Because we've got the after party, we've got the lunch, we've got the registration, things like that. So we ended up rebuilding the database. So we came up with this idea that every session, so we were going to have a flat array of sessions. Every session is going to have a start time and end time. It's going to have a room where it's in, a description, a title, and then we also created this idea of all being true. So if you state that all is true in our schedule system, then it says, hey, this is not really specific to a room, even though you can give it a name such as cafeteria. But then visually, when it's being rendered, we want it to take the entire space. And the bad thing about having to rebuild the database is then we also had to rebuild the JavaScript. So we actually ended up building a custom kind of renderer that would load this flat array of sessions from the database, from the Firebase repository, and then we would kind of re-render it into the way that we think it's actually going to be displayed on the screen, so that we could do things like iterating with kind of just an ng repeat using Angular. So you just repeat through the time slots, and then within each time slot you repeat through the rooms, and then you have all of your sessions. So if you compare that now to our existing site, now you'll see that we have these nice kind of wide bands, so it's clear everybody should be going to registration, everybody should be going to the keynote.
And there is, he hasn't told me any of this, so you may cover this later. One of the interesting things, I think, we're using Angular. So Stephen is an Angular expert, recognized by the wand of Google. It does a lot for you kind of out of the box. So one of the things it was doing was rendering the times, these start times, and we're part of this global community of GDG organizers. And somebody who was working with us about, actually through that group was, I was on a phone call with him, and he says, why are all your sessions starting at 5 p.m. and they go until midnight? That's not right at all. Well, he was in Europe. He was in Eastern Europe, and it knew his local time zone and recalculated the times that existed. In fact, which is why one of our presenters today was late to his session, because it said, well, it said I started at 11 when he looked at it sometime. We've since fixed that. I like to believe. And I'm doing this next one. what does this mean? Did I just jump on? I should have said what I just said in this space. Oh, the times.
The other thing that I think, at least I care about, and I think Lloyd cares about a lot, is URLs. So a traditional Angular site ends up looking like this, where you get that nice hashtag that says speakers, right, or any sort of session state. But there's actually a better way of building Angular applications now that actually allows you to fake out a full set of URLs. And it's a feature of HTML5 called HTML5 push state. And what it allows you to do is, using JavaScript, you're basically rewriting the history, which sounds like a lot of work, but Angular does virtually all of it for you. So if you look at the source code we needed to write to do that, we had to set a base so that all of our source code would ignore what fake URL was being used, and so it would actually know to look at the root of our site for any files, images, JavaScript, etc. And then in the config statement of our Angular app setup, we had to say HTML5 mode true. Seems pretty simple. But it's broke grunt. So if you remember, we had that very nice grunt tool where it's trying to serve things locally and recompile them and make everything magical. But when we first did those two changes, it actually broke our grunt configuration entirely, so that if you refreshed when you were no longer on the root, it couldn't find those files. And this is actually the server or system administration side of the HTML5 thing, where if someone refreshes and they're actually asking for a much longer URL, you need to make sure that it's pointing back to the index file if that file doesn't exist. So there actually was a single line fix within our grunt configuration that said, if the HTML file, JavaScript, SVG, CSS, whatever doesn't exist, point the user at our index.html file.
Why grunt? Why not gulp?
I love gulp.
Yeah.
We didn't make that part.
Oh, this came with the tool?
Came with the package that we bought.
That's what I thought it would be. Just curious.
Yeah, I can't imagine what you're going to do here. All right, so we did all of our code sharing on GitHub. I can't imagine what you want me to say about this. This was a good collaboration between Stephen and I, and we allowed other people to also help with the website. But as people with full-time jobs and families or planning a wedding, there's things that take your time away from being able to dedicate a lot of extra tweaking that exists in there. So fortunately, we were able to do the updates as needed, and they mostly worked. Sometimes it involved a quick chat to Stephen saying, I think I broke it, and I'm going away now. And then it would magically be fixed.
And in this case, this was Lloyd fixing a mistake. So I had fixed that tool and added this new gulp tool of HTML5 rewriting, but I hadn't actually added the dependency. So this is Lloyd saying, you suck, I fixed it, all better. URLs really matter. If you didn't hear me before, this totally was a thing for us. So originally, we had URLs like DevFest.MN/speakers, and then you would click on a speaker, and it would still say DevFest.MN/speakers, right? So you guys have seen that little pop-up that you get for speaker session data. Originally, that made no change to the URL. So there was no ability to deep link into sessions or speakers, which as a speaker, sometimes you want to share the link to your talk, or you want to say, hey, like, what about this page, or what about this session? So we really wanted to have a specific URL that would allow you to go directly to those things. That was kind of hard. So the way that Angular works, there's a traditional kind of routing tool called ng-route, which is not great because it isn't capable of handling any sort of nested state. And so what we did is we actually ported over all of the ng-route stuff to a newer library called UI-router. And what UI-router allowed us to do was create a substate of the session page and a substate of the speaker page, so that once you were on the speaker page or once you were on the sessions page, we could load something else on top of that or within that. And the nice thing about that was, because of how kind of well Angular in general is structured, the only place we really had to change much was in our routes.js file.
So quick poll, who in here is familiar with using Angular? All right. Firebase? See? All right. So this isn't over all of your heads.
So what we ended up doing in order to kind of fix this deep linking problem is we ended up using the Angular state to address a pop-up, which is kind of a very weird idea. So personally, I always think about, okay, there's a little view on the page, and I load things into that view. But the existing experience was a pop-up, which was very nice. So what we ended up doing is we kept the Angular, or we built the Angular routing to allow that substate to be addressable. And then we created an on-enter condition on that route, which opened the model. And then we allowed you to dismiss the modal, and then the calling route would say, hey, where did you want to go when you dismiss the modal? So although you couldn't actually change the URL from the experience, because we actually didn't let you. So if you click anywhere on the screen, you're either interacting with the modal or dismissing the modal, which is exactly what we wanted, which was kind of nice. So if you ever wanted to see what this kind of could look like to have this addressable pop-up, which is kind of an interesting idea, here it is kind of just visualized. So we had an on-enter. We checked to make sure that there were no empty sessions. And then we opened the modal with the right template and controller.
I'm ready.
You ready?
What else you'd like me to say about that? Right, so much of this was just smoke and mirrors and magic happening, as I said. There was a fair amount of collaboration, and then handing over to Stephen, who would do all the typey and make the magic work.
The other thing that I think we cared about was the idea of analytics. So before we got into the code base, every controller was responsible for doing its own analytics. So it would say, hey, I just got loaded, here's my state, here's the event, Google Analytics, track my event. But because analytics matter, because doing it in a kind of dispersed way is actually a lot of work, especially now that we have this idea of substates, where the state itself doesn't necessarily know where you came from, where you're going. There's a kind of standard solution that I use, which is just to use the state change success root scope run mechanism. So what this does is anytime either UI router or NG router or anything notices a state change, this code gets run. And so then we send the page view with the current path, which is actually pretty elegant because as it automatically adapts as you add more routes, as you add new pages to the site.
Oh, sure. Right, so again, expert on Android, on Angular, and somebody wanted an app that worked for people. For people using our site, we had all these assets that we built over the last couple of years. The web app, the mobile app, serving the data from Google Spreadsheet was one of the API endpoints that we had previously. Running actually last year, yeah, there was a number of things happening. And this is, in the background, you may not be able to see, this is Jason's Deli. There's many, many hours of development that happened here in Jason's Deli, and many times it was, we just need these things to work. And having a priority list of what was going to make a successful site was a good, I think, way that we both saw having a successful application that we would be happy with the attendees to be able to use. One, being able to have the most current information available on the site whenever you open the app. Because it's using Firebase, all of those are updated automatically. So if we were to change the structure behind the scenes, your page would update it. Every attendee looking at that schedule would notice that change in real time. The other being that you could save sessions to make your own session, your own schedule. So you look at one that looks interesting, you click the star, now that's saved to your account under your piece. And then we also want to have, because metrics matter, analytics matter, is to be able to do the feedback. So Stephen, weeks ago got that all nailed down.
How many people use the save to my schedule feature or noticed it? Okay, so you guys found the login, made it all the way there. Because there's a couple steps that I think were not intuitive or were not obvious that we probably should try and improve for next year.
Yeah.
One of the things that was being used by the existing site was Font Awesome, which whenever it would render locally in Grunt, would not render at all, which was kind of terrible. During the course of this process, we found this website called materialdesignicons.com, which I'm personally a huge fan of. Basically, they have all of the material design icons from Google in SVG format, PNG format, and so we actually started porting out. We didn't get through the whole site, just some of the more major pages. porting over from Font Awesome to these material design icons, where we'd actually just copy and paste the SVG code into the HTML. It's being minified already. Putting it in a separate file doesn't really save us much of anything, but I'm a huge fan of this site. Session feedback. So this was a screenshot of what this looked like, I don't know, 20 hours ago. This was something that we've always had in the past, but we thought, hey, instead of a Google form, we think we can do a little bit better by having it directly within the schedule that you might be browsing. This is easy, right? We'll just make a new Firebase object. We'll point at an endpoint, so in this case, feedback/2016, and then the ID of the user, and then the ID of the session. And then we'll bind that into the state, right? So that should be really simple.
Did I miss it? Oh, so I was enjoying your story. Tell me more. Yeah, so like anything that's happening last minute, things break. And people don't know. This was the day before, but you didn't say the day before that where I broke it all. and I think the schedule actually did render when I broke it, but no images and no formatting were there. So it was basically just a continuous string of text when I broke it. There are many breaks as things are.
How many people thought the app was perfect? Didn't run into any issues?
Awesome.
I think I should show off some Android.
Wait, are we talking the app or the website? Because the app is a lot better than your website.
So I'll call it the mobile website.
Oh, no, don't keep that.
So, Andrew, perfect?
No, I thought you were talking about the mobile app.
Nice. All right, talk's over.
Did you think we were talking about the app the whole time? Sorry about that. So this was just a dumb thing where sometimes users aren't logged in, apparently. But JavaScript, you can just say, hey, do I have these things I want to query on? And then it doesn't crash, and then you can actually click on schedule items, which is nice. So in the last 24 hours, we've had some kind of tumultuous situation. So mobile broke. So if anyone tried submitting feedback yesterday, which you shouldn't have tried anyway, in the sessions, the touch events weren't making it to the modal dialog for some reason. We noticed at some point feedback, although we were collecting feedback from people, and it is using Google Authenticator, or so we actually had your Google ID. We didn't actually have your name for the raffle and things like that, so that was a late add. And then a couple of our UI experts noticed that our login menu didn't collapse, which was confounding some users, because you click on the menu in mobile, you click on login, and the page would actually change, and you'd be on the right page, but the menu wasn't collapsing. So those were a few bugs that we've been playing with over the last 24 hours. To kind of, as we're getting closer to the end here, all of our successes and our failures are 100% public at github.com/gdgtc DeLorean. So the DeLorean is the name of the project. Feel free to take a look at the commits that we've had recently, even as late as lunchtime, as well as we're always open to pull requests. I hope we're going to reuse this site next year. We have a very bad track record of trying to reinvent the wheel every time we do a conference. But I think this time it's going to stick, unless Firebase goes away like Parse did, which I don't think is going to happen.
There's a lot of really good elements. I think that, I don't know what your other slides are, but what would you say are some of the successes from this?
I don't know. I would kind of hear from you guys. What did work about the app? The mobile website. Yeah.
Yeah, the adding the agenda thing was really nice.
Okay. Yeah, and that actually was as simple as a simple Firebase object sync. So because if we had a user ID, we rendered a component to the screen where it had two states. It's either on my agenda or not on my, or add to my agenda. And that state was synced up to your /user/agenda endpoint for the session. And because it didn't render if there was no user, we didn't have to worry about any sort of permissions or anything like that. Any other successes?
So I think if more on the GitHub repository that's out there, one of the things that's happened is there's a lot of kind of best intentions that get picked up as little pieces of gravel in this snowball that is the website that we have right now. And there's a lot of GDG organizers across the world, or across the country even, who are working really hard just to get people lined up to come give talks, maybe find some sponsors, to be able to launch a website that looks really good and is pretty easy to set up and be custom config to their specific environment. So one of the elements you'll see in the About page of our website, that's actually hooked into this long chain of other open source projects that have been done for just the GDG community. So it goes out and hits the endpoint of our developers.google.com GDG page, Google Plus page, and pulls some elements off of there, finds the profiles of the organizers that are listed on there, which is handy, right? If I'm somebody who doesn't know how to design a website, I can just find the Google Plus ID and plop it in there. But it also is a little bit constrained, and for us who might not prefer the way that it is rendered or that it lays out. But it also at the same time, it's done. And we don't have to spend a lot of time reconfiguring that. So I think were we to have all the time in the world, not in the world, as necessary to redo this, there'd be a considerable rebuild, I think, on this site. But there's a lot of pieces that are working really well.
So there's some stories that we didn't get to here. Stephen trying to automate the build and deploy, which is kind of cool. Continuous integration, right? You push to master and everything just works. First tried using PHP, then Docker and Ruby, then we gave up. The proxy server started crashing in the middle because the host went down, so we had to migrate to Google Cloud. And I didn't even tell Lloyd I did this, but I added performance monitoring and error capture in a tool called OPBeat. I don't know how to say it. So they just added Angular to their beta. So we actually now have a log of all of the errors that you guys have run into, which is very flattering and disheartening.
Wow.
Even errors like, oh, I'm in Korea and I don't know why I'm accessing your site, but I don't have the right thing installed, or I'm trying to hack your JavaScript and not loading Angular and that doesn't run. So there's some weird error messages in there, but I think the frequent ones are rising to the top. We definitely want help with this for next year if anyone's interested. So we schedule didn't load sometimes, so our big keynote speaker, Chet, at lunch he was trying to pull the schedule and it wasn't loading. We found out we ran out of Firebase instance capacity, because you guys all love the app so much, or the mobile website so much. I would say that our Firebase schedule loading with that cool re-rendering is very poorly optimized. We actually re-render it for every item on the schedule. So if there's 30 items on the schedule, it re-renders 31 times as it builds. Probably didn't notice, but it's not great. Time zones. Time zones shouldn't be localized. You'd think that they should. Time zones are hard. There's about 3 places in the code where there's a comment that says, like, I hate time zones. And then when we built that custom schedule schema to try and improve things and make it easier for kind of our large style conference, we built a temporary tool called Schedule Edit, which needs to be reworked back into schedule. So those are just some ways that people could help out. And to wrap things up, I'm going to hand it over to Lloyd.
All right. To wrap things up, yeah, I think relying a lot on the cloud, the Google Cloud system that already exists, has really helped, I think, the whole cycle and the development process of this. When that deploy script was working, it was pretty dreamy to just commit to master, and a couple seconds later, it somewhere up in the cloud had noticed that and redeployed to our Firebase application. And it was a good process. I think that the managing all the aspects we've talked about, having a usable website that's easy for the developers and the administrators of it to use, really were the key goals of ours. I don't know if anybody wants a little behind the scenes look into the Firebase side of things. Would that be useful? I think since there were only 2 people that raised their hands about that might be something interesting to spend a minute or 2 on.
Sure. So let's jump out before we even get into questions. Now, let's see if I can mirror the screen so that I don't. No, screenshot. Mirror. Okay. So let's open Chrome here. That window's too far right. All right. What do you want me to put? Actually, let's demonstrate the back end first.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the site that you guys have seen. beautiful and wonderful. If you log in with one of the IDs in the admin section of Firebase, you actually get a few secret tools. So the first one here is this idea of edit schedule. So this was that tool that we built in the back end to modify our custom array of schedule items. And if anyone has the site up right now, you'll actually see the kind of Firebase in action. So if we search for DevFest.MN, and I just change this to awesomifying, and I hit save here, you'll actually see that reload in real time, or should.
That was awesome.
So maybe we just had low confidence in our schedule finalization skills, but that's so cool to us, just that you can, in Firebase, you can modify these things in real time. The other thing, the tool that actually does work rather well is our speakers page, where you can actually go ahead and add speakers on the fly. You can modify them. So let's just find Lloyd here. And he forgot to write a bio. So you've got this kind of nice modal window where you're able to modify things.
Is that form kind of auto-gen based on the data schema?
So we'll jump to the data schema next. So let's go to DevFestMN.firebase.io.
No, it's not.
It's not, okay. I just,
No, so I mean, and that's actually the funny thing is the database is auto-gen. The database schema is auto-gen from the HTML schema, right? So you make your edit fields in HTML, and then because Firebase is a non-SQL store, just it's a document store, it just pushes up whatever you send it and it works. So that's why we were able to do the agenda relatively quickly, as well as the session data relatively quickly. So this is going to take a little bit of time to load the first time. So most of you have seen Angular, not all of you have seen Firebase. So Firebase, the idea is you use a Firebase client on a JavaScript, Android, iOS, I think that's it, where you say, hey, give me an endpoint, and then there's an event every time that endpoint changes. So you can say, hey, anytime one of the schedule items is created, I want to do this with it. I want to render this on the screen. And then if you do with Angular, you can actually triple bind, so you have database, controller, and view all bound end to end. So that's why when we updated the speaker's name or whatever, you actually saw that propagate all the way from the database through the controller to the view without any coding, which is one of the coolest things that I've ever seen. This is not loading, so let's jump to DevFest. So here's the proxy that we built for this, which basically just strips out the schedule data. So you're going to see that flat array of schedule items, and then just kind of simple category description and time, room, speakers. So to your question, if we added a new field in the HTML, in the view, we wouldn't have to do anything in the controller or the database, and it would just work. Which is the kind of magic of Angular and Firebase. Right? So
you would, where is this being hosted? Where's DevFestMN being hosted?
So the database?
No, like the JavaScript files.
Firebase. So
Okay.
they offer,
okay.
but they're just static files. It's just
Okay.
static HTML JavaScript.
Okay. But you can push via Git to Firebase, like you can make.
There's a Firebase deploy command,
Okay.
which puts it onto their hosting. It's a little bit like Heroku if you've used that at all. Okay, so it's loaded. So the Firebase dashboard is actually pretty cool because you can see the whole tree at the same time, and you can actually make edits. So if we wanted to go in and make that same change to the DevFestMN, it's probably not open here. Can we modify chat stock instead?
There you go.
Awesome Android development. So you can see it changed here, and then if we check out the live website, that'll propagate it instantly. What else did you want to see on the schema? So we had schedule, speakers, we had sponsors, but we stopped using it because it was easier to hard code in HTML. The 6 sponsors we had, there was no reason for a database for that.
Right. Yeah, and are folks familiar with NoSQL? That the open-ended structure of that? Like, so Stephen could expand one of those schedule items or the speaker and just add a data element to that person. and because the views aren't actually looking for that, it won't render anywhere, but that's now been saved to the data store. And using Angular, if we were to create a field with awesome factor, and then save that form, it would then just save it right out to Firebase.
I'll pull that up real quick.
Your awesome factor?
No, I'll pull up where we render and where we bind to the view. App.
So are you putting those values in the scope of Angular, $scope? Or?
So yeah, so we load the entire Firebase endpoint for a speaker,
Okay.
which means that the view can access whatever it wants to.
It's on the scope, right? Root scope or the controller scope?
Yeah, $scope dot speaker, for example. So speaker's view. So here you can see all we have to do is say speaker.google, speaker.facebook, speaker.twitter. If we added a line here that said speaker.awesomefactor, that would show up on the site. Although you'd have to reload to get the JavaScript, you don't have to reload to get the content. That all loads in real time. Because Firebase is a real-time data store. They're a great NoSQL database, but the reason they're better than anyone else is real time. Any other questions you guys have?
JSON output for the mobile app, is that pretty much automatic, or do you have?
Yeah, so every Firebase node, you can actually inherently get a JSON object by just, they have a RESTful API where it allows you to get .json or put to or post to .json, and it allows you to build mobile applications without the Firebase client libraries, which is very convenient. So what we're doing is we're proxying, loading that JSON file, stripping out the speaker images, and then rendering it back up on the screen. And then our speaker image endpoint is doing something similar. It's finding the Firebase endpoint with the speaker basic form-coded image, and then using an image processing library to thumbnail it, and then send it back with the appropriate headers. Any other questions? Thank you guys so much for coming.